What if the person controlling the match wasn't playing? Not the player, not the coach, not even the referee, but the owner. Behind the scenes of competitive esports, where milliseconds decide outcomes and millions watch from around the world, a system built on precision and fairness began to fracture. Because, in one case, the integrity of the game wasn't just compromised, it was controlled. At the center of it all was Alexey Shyshko, not a rising player, not a struggling competitor, but a man with power. As a team owner, he wasn't just part of the system, he was in a position to influence it. And that's where the line was crossed. Because according to findings by the Esports Integrity Commission, Shyshko didn't just participate in esports, he manipulated it. Matches weren't just played, they were influenced. Players weren't just competing, they were being approached, offered money, given instructions, placed in positions where one decision could change everything. And in esports, that's all it takes. One delayed reaction, one mistimed move, one round thrown at the right moment. To the audience, it looks like pressure. To the system behind it, it's precision. Because match fixing in esports doesn't need chaos. It needs subtlety. And according to the investigation, that subtlety was being orchestrated from above. There were allegations of illegal communication channels, covert instructions during matches, financial incentives tied not to performance, but to outcome. And perhaps most disturbing of all, bets placed on matches that were no longer fair. Because once the outcome is influenced, the game stops being competition. It becomes a transaction. And the players? They become pieces in a system they no longer control. For fans watching from home, nothing looked different. The matches streamed live. The commentary continued. The tension felt real. But behind the screen, the truth was shifting. Because if the person with power is manipulating the result, then every moment becomes questionable. Every victory becomes uncertain. Every loss becomes suspicious. This wasn't just cheating. This was control. And once control enters a competitive system, the game itself begins to collapse. When corruption enters a system built on competition, the damage doesn't stay at the top. It spreads quietly, relentlessly. And in esports, where careers are short and pressure is constant, the ripple effect hits fast. For players, the game is everything. Hours of practice, endless repetition, a life built around reaction time, discipline, and performance. But when someone in power begins to manipulate outcomes, the rules change. Because now, it's no longer just about skill. It's about decisions being made behind the scenes. According to findings tied to Alexey Shyshko, players weren't always acting freely. Some were allegedly approached, offered incentives, placed in situations where saying no wasn't always simple. And that's where the real damage begins. Because not every player enters the system with power. Some are young, some are unknown, some are trying to survive in a competitive industry where one opportunity can change everything. So when influence comes from above, it creates pressure, not always direct, not always visible, but real. A suggestion instead of an order, an opportunity instead of a threat, a decision that feels small in the moment, but carries consequences far beyond it. And once a player crosses that line, even once, everything changes. Because now performance is no longer pure, it's influenced. And even players who had nothing to do with it become part of the doubt. A missed shot becomes suspicious. A lost round becomes questionable. A comeback feels less convincing. Because once integrity is broken, every action is reinterpreted. But the ripple doesn't stop with players. It reaches the fans. Millions of viewers tune into esports believing they're watching real competition. They invest time, emotion, trust. They celebrate wins, debate strategies, analyze performances. But what happens when that reality is compromised? When the match you watched wasn't entirely real? That's the betrayal. Not just that corruption existed, but that it existed while people believed in the game. And for the esports ecosystem, that's dangerous. Because esports doesn't rely on tradition like physical sports. It relies on trust, digital trust. If fans begin to question whether outcomes are genuine, engagement drops, confidence weakens, and the entire system becomes unstable. This is the ripple effect. Not loud, not immediate, but lasting. Because once doubt enters the system, it doesn't leave easily. Corruption doesn't reveal itself all at once. It leaks in patterns, in anomalies, in moments that don't quite make sense. In this case, the first signs didn't come from a confession. They came from observation. Matches that felt off, not obviously rigged, but subtly inconsistent. Rounds lost at critical moments. Uncharacteristic decisions from experienced players. Outcomes that didn't align with expected performance. At first, it could be explained away. Pressure, fatigue, bad form. But over time, those explanations stopped holding because patterns began to repeat. And in competitive systems, repetition without logic is a signal. That's when deeper scrutiny began. Data was reviewed, match footage analyzed, behavior tracked over time, and then another layer emerged. Betting activity, unusual patterns, timing that aligned too closely with key in-game moments, wagers placed in ways that suggested prior knowledge. That's when suspicion turned into investigation. The Esports Integrity Commission stepped in. And when ESIC gets involved, it means one thing. This is no longer speculation. It's a potential breach of the system itself. What followed wasn't quick. It wasn't simple. Because cases like this don't exist on the surface. They exist in layers. Investigators began connecting signals. Match data with betting data. Player behavior with external communication. Outcomes with financial movement. And slowly, a structure began to appear. Not random incidents, not isolated decisions, but a coordinated system. At the center of that system was Alexey Shyshko, a figure with access, with influence, with proximity to players and matches. According to findings, there were indications of covert communication during matches, influence over player decisions, financial incentives tied to specific outcomes. And once those elements align, intent becomes clear. Because in competitive environments, coincidence has limits. And this had crossed them. The investigation expanded. Time frames widened. Connections deepened. More data was examined. Because the critical question wasn't just what happened. It was how long it had been happening and how many matches had been affected. This is the nature of integrity investigations. They don't just expose actions. They expose systems. And once a system is exposed, it forces a larger question. Was this the only one? When the evidence is no longer deniable, the system responds. And in this case, it responded with the most severe punishment possible. The Esports Integrity Commission delivered its ruling. A decision that didn't just end a case. It sent a message. Alexey Shyshko was issued a lifetime ban. Not a suspension. Not a temporary removal. A permanent exclusion from all ESIC-governed events. From participation in any official capacity. From being part of the system he once operated within. In esports, that's absolute. Because ESIC's reach extends across multiple tournaments, leagues, and organizers. A lifetime ban doesn't just remove you from one space. It removes you from the ecosystem completely. Years of influence erased. Access to competition gone. The ability to rebuild a career within the industry closed. And the consequences didn't stop there. Individuals connected to the case faced scrutiny. Teams associated with the network were affected. Because when corruption is exposed at that level, it rarely exists in isolation. The ruling sent shockwaves across the esports world. Players took notice. Organizations took notice. Because this wasn't just punishment. It was a warning. That influence does not equal immunity. That power does not protect you. And that the system, when pushed far enough, will act. But beneath the surface of that response, another reaction began to spread. Fear. Not just among those involved, but across the ecosystem. Because cases like this force uncomfortable questions. How many players were approached? How many said no? How many didn't? How many matches were influenced in ways that were never detected? Because while one case has been exposed, it doesn't guarantee others don't exist. And that uncertainty changes behavior. Players become more cautious. Organizations tighten internal controls. Integrity systems are re-evaluated. Because once a breach is confirmed, the focus shifts from reaction to prevention. And in moments like this, the industry stands at a crossroads. Either this becomes a turning point where systems evolve and strengthen, or it becomes a temporary shock before patterns repeat. Because punishment alone doesn't restore trust. It only creates the opportunity to rebuild it. When the ban is issued, when the headlines spread, when the story reaches its peak, what remains? In the case of Alexey Shyshko, the outcome is clear on paper. A lifetime ban, a permanent removal from the system, a definitive consequence. But beyond the ruling, there's something less visible, something harder to measure: the impact on belief. Because esports, unlike traditional sports, exists almost entirely on trust. There are no physical boundaries, no visible referees on the field, no crowd watching every movement in real time. Everything happens through screens, through code, through signals, through systems that the audience cannot fully see. And that makes integrity even more critical, because when something goes wrong, it's harder to detect. And once it's exposed, it's harder to forget. Fans who watch those matches may never look at them the same way again. Moments that once felt intense now feel uncertain. That clutch play, was it real? That mistake, was it intentional? That victory, was it earned? These questions don't disappear. They linger, quietly influencing how every future match is experienced. And for players, the impact runs even deeper. Because trust isn't just external, it's internal. They must believe that the system they compete in is fair, that their effort matters, that their skill determines the outcome. But when cases like this emerge, that belief is challenged. And once doubt enters the mind of a competitor, it changes how the game is played. More caution, more suspicion, less certainty. The Esports Integrity Commission acted decisively. But the responsibility doesn't end there. Because maintaining integrity isn't a one-time action. It's an ongoing process. Monitoring systems, strengthening oversight, creating environments where corruption is harder to initiate and easier to detect. Because the future of esports depends on one thing above all else: credibility. Without it, the game still exists, but it loses meaning. And that's the true endgame. Not just punishing what happened, but ensuring it doesn't define what comes next. Because at its core, this story leaves us with one final question. If the person behind the system can control the outcome, was the game ever truly in the player's hands?